Paradoxes, lies, misinformation, and deceit. The building of a modern day organization that does not practice what it preaches. The Black Lives Matter movement is no secret. Since the death of Michael Brown in 2014, Americans have been indoctrinated with its ideologies with little regard to their affection toward or distaste against it. This is by no means an attempt to legitimize the intent that Black lives do not matter, they unequivocally do. And this is by no means an attempt to downplay or discredit the plausibility that a very small number of law enforcement officers in our country have done heinous and inhumane things against all people. They have. This is, however, based on facts, evidence, and research, the process of unraveling the hypocritical, self seeking, radical, and truly anti American organization Black Lives Matter has truly become. A friend has taken the mission statement from the Black Lives Matter website and dissected major pieces aligned with the history it honors and the statistical data needed to prove and disprove its legitimacy today. Each section will be titled as a piece from the mission statement itself. What follows are the various pieces of evidence I present that debunks each part of the statement in general. In the end, my hope is that anyone who reads this information will decide for themselves the legitimacy of an organization that is in the forefront of national contention and whether this is something we should wholeheartedly align ourselves with, as so many have done. Number one, violence against minorities that are state sanctioned. Black Lives Matter boldly expresses there is and continues to be purposeful violence against minorities which are upheld by the systematic racism and legislation against minorities that are state sanctioned. And there are many historical documents that show systematic and state sanctioned violence against minorities existed. But since I am attempting to keep this as brief as possible, I would not name each as these can easily be researched and are not disputed. So, as history proves the wrongs, it also legitimizes the rights. President Lyndon Johnson signed into effect the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This act, in short, made it illegal for state sanctioned action against minorities, and although it was challenged in the turbulent times of the 1960s, it has stood the test of time and legality and upholding the law for all people. The Black Lives Matter movement has deceived the general public into believing that the United States both sanctions and allows systematic violence against minorities, and history has proven this is just not so. Number two, sheer desire for justice, guided by the fact that all Black lives matter. The Black Lives Matter movement was brought to the forefront of the New Age civil rights movement following the Michael Brown shooting in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. Justice, according to the records of the Brown case following his death, was served as a judge ruled that based on the due process and evidence presented that the officer was in reasonable danger and that evidence shows the hands of Brown were clearly not held up in surrender. The same justice the Black Lives Matter speaks of in its own mission statement is in direct conflict with its own actions following the conclusion of the case, and we do remember that. In the same manner, justice has not to date been served for thousands of young men and women across the country as it relates to gun violence. According to statistics from the FBI database, since 2014, 97% of African Americans in the United States have been murdered by other African Americans. Black on black crime has accounted for, on average, 2,200 deaths per year. Every year since 2014, which coincidentally is the same year the Black Lives Matter movement became extremely active. In fact, more murders happened in 2014 from black on black crime than the total number of lynchings and murders of blacks in the United States from 1882 to 1968. If, for example, a lynching were to occur in the United States tonight, it would infuriate and incite racial upheaval from all people as it should. So the question is this: why has the Black Lives Matter movement not made the necessary steps toward ending the deaths of thousands of black Americans, with whom most are under the age of 30? Number three, rampant and deliberate violence inflicted on us. Referring back to statistics that prove blacks kill more blacks than anyone else, we must research the steps on how the Black Lives Matter movement is fighting the rampant and deliberate killing of young black Americans. According to Webster, rampant means something that is out of control, flourishing, spreading, and unrestrained. Does data not show that the deaths of so many young Americans is both deliberate and accidental? If so, how is the Black Lives Matter movement fighting this in accordance with its own mission statement? Is there a true system in the place for the rapid killing of black Americans by the police when statistics so often prove otherwise? If so, how is the Black Lives Matter rhetoric logical? Number four, commitment to liberation for all black people means we are continuing the work of our ancestors. According to Webster, liberation means the freeing of a person or people from tyranny or slavery. Based on the United States Constitution, the 13th through the 15th Amendments previously freed all enslaved persons from involuntary servanthood. While the amendments in and of themselves could not prevent bigotry in the United States following their signing, it did, legally. said all persons previously described as property to be free men. So legality was on our side beginning in 1865. For the Black Lives Matter movement to describe themselves as the liberators of all blacks is a blanket implication that all blacks are still bound in slavery and servitude. We know this both to be inaccurate and illegal based on the Constitution of the United States. As the Black Lives Matter movement prescribes itself as the liberators of all blacks and positions itself as the liberators of their ancestors, I cannot help but wonder the perceptual silence on the current conditions of African slavery and present day servanthood. According to Abdul Latif Dahi in Courts Africa, quote, Africa has the largest population of slavery in the world, end quote. If this is the case, why is the Black Lives Matter movement silent on the atrocities of our ancestors? Number five, we acknowledge, respect, and celebrate differences and commonalities. Seems fair. Various websites have shown overwhelming evidence, on video no less, of the shaming, blaming, harming, attacking, and even death of individuals who did not believe or go along with the narrative of the Black Lives Matter movement or sought to resist it. One such instance is the death of retired officer Captain David Dorn, who lost his own life during a Black Lives Matter peaceful demonstration. His death, along with a dozen others, mostly all black Americans, show the hypocrisy in the mission to allow differences and the acceptance of anything but conformity. Number six, we intentionally build a mutual and beloved common bond together through a beautiful struggle that is restorative, not depleting. Multiple video sources have shown that the protesting turned riots in cities such as Minneapolis, Los Angeles, and New York City, and many others, do not reflect the language of restorativeness. In fact, evidence shows that the situations in these cities have depleted its inhabitants, which are predominantly minority, as opposed to liberating them as previously mentioned. The restoration of minority businesses lost, cities in ruins, and actual lives taken does not align with the mission statement produced by the Black Lives Matter movement. In fact, in contradiction, the unrest has depleted more minorities than any swing of the United States economy in past 3 years. Number seven, we make spaces family friendly and enable parents to partake with their children. Based on visual and audio evidence, numerous protesters taking part in the Black Lives Movement marches have been recorded as saying things such as fuck 12, pigs burn, and fuck the police. Now, look, I'm a firm defender of everyone's First Amendment rights, but one could argue that indoctrinating young children in this family friendly environment could be harming their ability to correctly and psychologically process their own feelings about law enforcement and authority, both now and in the future, doing more harm to future minority communities than good. And finally, number eight, we disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure. According to Webster, a nuclear family consists of a couple and their dependent children as a basic social unit. This being said, it can be scientifically and sociologically safe to assume that the nuclear family Black Lives Matter as an organization seeks to disrupt is the very unit as defined by Webster. A study conducted by a group of high school students, which has excellent and reliable sources, shows that in 1960, 73% of families had a cohesive nuclear unit. By the year 2014, this number dropped to 46%. In Atlanta Black Star Online, a 2013 study shows the importance of fathers in the home. The disintegration of the nuclear family can be directly related to the family breakdown issues that lead to many minority children to find social status and power in guns. The same study also shows that kids outside of a nuclear family drop out of high school at higher rates, become dependent of welfare at higher rates, and engage in more criminal acts than those with fathers in the home. In fact, in Washington, D.C. alone, 84% of families were single parent homes, which statistically lead to higher poverty, dependency on the government, and higher crime rates. As the Black Lives Matter movement systematically targets the nuclear family, it instantly negates its own credibility to actually protect black children and families, thus protecting the black community itself. In all, the Black Lives Matter movement is a danger to not only minority communities, but to all communities. It is not a danger simply because someone claims it to be. By disregarding its own standards and fundamental system of beliefs, it has proven itself just how dangerous it is to all Americans. The question now simply is, what do we do? If turning the tide against such a movement exists, can it be done? Should it be done? We each have to look into things deeply, like applying a generic sticker and saying Black Lives Matter is the right to do, but may not be the clearest course of action. We should instead be asking ourselves, is there a better way? Other than promoting an organization that has historically shown itself not to be the true representatives of themselves and of the communities it claims to represent and protect against injustice.